Hey guys, so in this video we're going to talk about a pretty widely discussed topic that I've been asked about ever since I started my channel. That discussion topic is high sensitivity versus low sensitivity, and which, if either, is better. I've wanted to make this video for a while because of all the DMs I get from you guys asking if you should play high sense or low sense, and I also see a ton of these stupid clickbait videos all over YouTube. As we get further into the video, you'll see why I'm making this video an episode of my Fortnite MythBusters series instead of just a regular video. Basically, in my MythBusters series, I take hotly debated topics or just general areas of Fortnite that people are misinformed about, and I try to explain it to the best of my ability. It's kind of in the title of the series, but the end goal is to dispel any myths and leave you guys more informed and educated about a topic. Before we start with this episode, I'll put timestamps on the screen now for each different section I go over in case you guys want to skip around. Each section will build off a previous one, so I do suggest watching the whole thing through, but it's up to you guys in the end. With that being said, let's begin with a general overview and introduction to Fortnite sensitivities. Your sensitivity in Fortnite is actually more complicated than you would think, just because there's a ton of different things that go into it. Sensitivity just means how sensitive your game is to movements from your mouse, or from your joysticks on controller, or even from finger swipes if you're on mobile. If you play on a high sensitivity, that means your game and character will be more sensitive to any adjustments you make. When you move your mouse or joystick at a normal pace on a high sense, your screen will also move really fast because your sense is high. If you have a low sensitivity, that means your game won't be that sensitive to adjustments. Even when you try and move your mouse or joystick around fast, you'll have to put in a lot more effort to try and make it look as fast as someone who's on a higher sensitivity. Like I said before, Fortnite sensitivity isn't really that simple though. On PC, you have your DPI, your in-game sense, eDPI, ADS, which is aim down sight, and scope sensitivities. On console, you have your in-game sense, ADS, scope sensitivities, dead zones, building, and editing sensitivities. And for mobile, you guys have touch sensitivity, touch targeting, and touch scope sensitivities, and I believe even a vertical sensitivity multiplier. We're going to focus on in-game sensitivities and DPIs as those matter more for your overall sense and gameplay. Your ADS and scope sense are still important, but they're used more for improving your aim than your overall gameplay. We want to focus on your true gameplay sensitivity while doing things like looking around, building, aiming, and editing. I'm a PC player, so I don't have the best advice or experience with controller or mobile sensitivities, but the point of this video isn't to find the best sense, it's to discuss pros, cons, and general debate about high versus low sense. Subtle plug though, I have a guide to help you guys find your perfect sensitivity, so be sure to check that out. Anyways, now we'll talk about how to define high and low sense. For controller players, we'll use in-game sense, while for keyboard and mouse players, we don't want to look at only in-game sense for just general high and low sense comparisons. Reason is that we care more about your eDPI, which I quickly mentioned before. Your eDPI, or effective dots per inch, is your in-game sense times your DPI. So my in-game sense is 0.12 and my DPI is 400. 0.12 times 400 is 48, so my eDPI is 48. We only want to look at keyboard and mouse players' eDPI because your overall sense in Fortnite depends equally on your in-game sense and DPI. If two players have the same in-game sense, say 0.10, and one player plays on 400 DPI while the other player plays on 1600 DPI, their sensitivities will be completely different. The 400 DPI player has a 40 eDPI, which is really low, while the 1600 DPI player has a 160 eDPI, which is very high. So while both of these players had the same in-game sense, their DPIs make their eDPIs much different from each other. To quickly go over what your DPI is, it stands for dots per inch and measures your mouse's sensitivity. This is completely different from your in-game sense, which does as it sounds and is a measure of your in-game Fortnite sensitivity. Your DPI is used for browsing the web and just general desktop PC use, but for Fortnite specifically, it's used to swap around items in your inventory, and of course, it influences your overall sense through your eDPI. Think of your eDPI as your overall or your true sensitivity because it gives us a way to compare true sensitivities of different players regardless of their hardware or software settings. To find your eDPI, like I said before, just multiply your DPI and in-game sense. You can easily find your in-game sense in your Fortnite settings, but your DPI might be a little harder to find. If you have a Logitech mouse or a mouse from a well-known brand, just download your mouse's drivers or programs that the manufacturer provides for your mouse. Your software will tell you what your DPI is and if you can change it. If your mouse doesn't have drivers available, just look up the mouse's exact make and model online. So look at the bottom of the mouse for its name and maybe some model or ID number. Usually an online retailer like Amazon or Best Buy will sell the mouse online, and you can just go to their website and look at the details and specifications to find what DPI it offers and what is set by default. For a rough rule of thumb, I'd say anything less than 50 eDPI would be considered low sense. 50 to maybe 90 eDPI would be considered a pretty middle ground sense, not too fast or not too slow, and then anything above 90 eDPI would be considered high. If you're above 200 or 250 eDPI, that's insanely fast, and I'm going to be honest with you, you should probably lower it, but just check my sensitivity guide to see if your mouse and your sensitivity is right for you. A good website that I found for checking eDPIs of pro players is called prosettings.net that actually compiled every pro player's DPI in GameSense and eDPI. The average eDPI for pro players that you guys know is 70, so my rule of thumb was actually pretty accurate. But just looking at the huge list of all these pro players and content creators, you can see there's a huge range. Some players like Tfue play at 40 eDPI, while MrSavageM plays on 160 eDPI. So now everyone should understand their eDPI, sensitivity, and what's high versus low. So let's get into which is actually better. The answer to that question is actually, unfortunately, very anticlimactic. It's all preference.
But Jerian, you piece of crap fraud, how could it be preference?
The answer is actually pretty simple. Let's compare two of the best players in the world, Mongraal and MrSavageM. These are easily two of the best players in the world. They both have insane building, editing, aiming, and game sense. They both consistently place at the top of the leaderboards for online tournaments and qualifiers, and interestingly enough, they're both 14 years old. As I say this, MrSavageM didn't qualify for the first finals of week 1 for the World Cup, so while it's kind of bad timing, I mean, come on, we know how good he is. Anyways, I'm going to use them for my argument because they're both ridiculously young and amazing players, but what's cool is that their sensitivities are polar opposites. Mongraal plays on 400 DPI with 0.11 X sense and 0.10 Y sense, so we'll call it a 44 eDPI, which is really low. MrSavageM plays on 2000 DPI and 0.08 cents, which comes out to 160 eDPI, almost 4 times Mongraal's eDPI. If you've ever watched Mongraal play though, you would never think he's on a low sense because of how fast he builds and edits. And you would also never think that MrSavageM plays on such an insanely high eDPI and sense that he does because of how accurate his shotgun shots are and how he really never messes up his edits or builds. In Fortnite, there's a clear benefit to being able to build and edit fast. The faster you build, the more opportunities you have to kill opponents, take high ground, and just block damage. This doesn't mean that high sense is better, but for most people, the easiest way to achieve faster building and editing is to raise their sense. On the other hand, there's a clear benefit to having a lower sense and having smooth and precise aiming and tracking. You'll hit more shots, do more damage overall, and secure more kills. The easiest way for players to do this is to lower their sense. Again, this doesn't mean that low sense is better per se. Any player on high sense can still have good aim, and any player on low sense can still build and edit fast. The reason some do or don't is based on exactly what I said, their preference. This goes hand in hand with the age-old question of ARM versus risk gaming. If you don't know what ARM and risk gaming means, it's just the two general categories for how you move your mouse around. In Fortnite, you move your mouse around to move your crosshairs for aiming or to build or edit. You basically use it for everything. ARM gamers use their whole arm to move around their mouse, so they generally play on low sensitivities and make long sweeping motions to do a 360 or just to move around fast. This means they'll have larger mouse pads to account for having to use their whole arm and for having a low sense. Risk gamers are the opposite, so they'll only move their wrist for gaming and they'll make fine, little tiny, delicate movements with their mouse. Risk gamers don't need large mouse pads because they're not moving their mouse around with their arm. It generally sits in the same small area and only moves a tiny bit because movements with your wrist are very small. The benefits of ARM aiming are the same with low sensitivity. Tracking is easier as you can be more precise and smooth when keeping your crosshair on someone. The con is that you really have to whip your arm around to be able to turn direction quickly, like doing a fast 180 or a 360. This is the benefit of risk gaming in that you can change direction quickly. The con of risk gaming though is that it's harder to be more accurate in tracking compared to ARM aiming. While there are some health concerns with risk gaming in the long run, it generally comes down to preference, which is why that's the answer to the high versus low sense questions. Mongraal is an example of an ARM gamer in Fortnite, and you see it if you watch his streams. While doing 90s, he basically moves his mouse across the entire desk, and his hand looks like a dead fish flopping all over the place. MrSavageM is a risk gamer, and if you watch his hand cam, he barely moves it even when he does a bunch of crazy builds and edits. Some of you guys might like a combination of it, where you use your arm for big motions and then you use your wrist for small adjustments, which is what I kind of do, but you need to see what you like and what you're comfortable with. It goes without saying that your setups could also kind of hinder and change how you play. So if you're on a tiny little mouse pad, you're probably going to have to be a risk gamer unless you get a bigger mouse pad. Just think about it, if it takes you like 40 centimeters to do a 360 and your mouse pad is only 15 centimeters long, obviously you're going to struggle on low sense and you're going to have to increase increase your sense to be able to keep up and just turn directions and actually be decent. If you can, get a big mouse pad so you can decide and see what you prefer, ARM and low sense versus wrist and high sense gaming. Finding your perfect sense is important, and it will definitely help you improve your aim, your building, editing, and just overall gameplay. So to sum it up, high sense isn't better than low sense, and low sense isn't better than high sense. It all comes down to preference. To measure your sensitivity, use your eDPI and compare it to popular pro players to see if yours is faster or slower. If you're looking for a good way to find your sense, just check out my guide to finding your perfect sense. If you guys learned something from this video or enjoyed it, please be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Thank you to everyone still using my code as we venture through these tough times at Fortnite. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you high sense and low sense gamers in the next one. Later.